I used to think numbers were clean things, cold, exact, untainted by human hands. That was before I met Dr. Marlowe, and before I learned how far a man might go when the mathematics of his life didn't balance. Marlowe was a lecturer at the university when I first knew him, sharp-minded, peculiar, and always dressed in suits that seemed a decade out of fashion. He had a restless air about him, a way of talking as if there were another, invisible conversation running parallel in his head. You'd ask him about the weather, and he'd answer with a comment about symmetry or the decay rate of radioactive particles. But for all his brilliance, he had one serious disadvantage. He was poor. His lectures barely paid for his upkeep, and he lived in a narrow flat above a grocer's shop. His one hope of stability lay with his cousin Edmund, a wealthy bachelor who lived in a handsome house on the edge of town. Edmund's fortune, Marlowe said to me once, his tone too casual, is like a problem in need of solving. And problems, well, they beg for solutions, don't they? I laughed at the time, dismissing it as one of his odd turns of phrase. When Edmund fell ill, Marlowe volunteered as his caregiver. It surprised everyone, but Marlowe seemed to take to the role eagerly, almost with devotion. He'd move through the old house carrying trays of food, brewing teas, adjusting the bottles of medicine on the bedside table. Sometimes I'd visit and see him wandering the garden, stooping to examine wild fungi sprouting beneath the oaks. He was fascinated by mushrooms, so much so that he once spent an entire evening explaining their chemical structures to me, sketching diagrams of alkaloids on a napkin. Perfect balances, he murmured. Toxic in one ratio, medicinal in another. Nature understands equations far better than we do. When Edmund died that winter, peacefully, the doctor said, in his sleep, no one suspected anything unnatural. Marlowe inherited the estate, and for the first time in his life, he seemed content. But I couldn't forget the look in his eyes at the funeral, a strange glimmer, not of grief, but of satisfaction. In the months that followed, I visited him often at the house. He had grown fuller in the face, more robust, but there was something else about him too, something that unsettled me. His hands, once steady and pale, bore faint, dark stains, as though he had handled ink that wouldn't wash off. Sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, I saw him rub at the marks until the skin grew raw. He spoke often of mathematics, though not in the way of a lecturer anymore. Instead, his language had grown almost mystical. There's an equation that governs us all, he told me one evening over dinner. Every life is a fraction waiting to be simplified. Edmund was excess, a numerator too heavy for the denominator. By removing him, I balanced the expression. The words chilled me, though he smiled as he spoke them. Marlowe, I said, you can't mean... He raised a hand. Don't mistake me. I loved Edmund in my way, but once you glimpse the unknown quantity, you see the necessity of balance. He wouldn't elaborate, and I left the table shaken. It was after that night that I began to notice other peculiarities. His diet grew restrictive. He would eat little except bread and wine, though his plate was always garnished with mushrooms, exotic varieties, delicate and pale. Strangely, he never touched them. The estate staff whispered about him. They said he muttered in his study until dawn, scribbling numbers across sheaves of paper. They said his laughter, once rare, now rang through the halls at odd hours. One evening, I dared to ask him about it. The unknown quantity, he said simply. I've solved it. He showed me his notes. They were a tangle of equations sprawling across the pages like veins, punctuated with symbols I didn't recognize. In the center was a single figure, circled over and over in red. I couldn't bear to look at it for long. Something about the number hurt my eyes, as though it was shifting even as I tried to read it. What does it mean? I asked. It means balance, he whispered. It means that when I administered those mushrooms to Edmund, the scales corrected themselves. His death wasn't murder, it was mathematics. His eyes glittered feverishly, and the number proves it. After that, I saw less of him. His health declined strangely. His once clear complexion grew sallow, his lips tinged with gray. The dark stains on his hands deepened, like bruises blooming beneath the skin. Yet he carried himself with a kind of triumphant energy, as though decay itself was a victory. The last time I dined with him, the sight of him nearly turned my stomach. His nails had blackened at the edges, his smile revealed gums streaked dark. Still, he was in high spirits, pouring wine and speaking with animation. "You mustn't pity me," he said, catching the look on my face. "This is only the equation working itself out. Edmund's death shifted the balance. Now it passes into me. Every act has its consequence." He gestured at the mushrooms untouched on his plate. "I need only continue the sequence. Each step brings me closer to perfect symmetry." I tried to argue, to tell him he was sick, that his obsession was killing him. But he only laughed, and the sound was so hollow it chilled me to the marrow. I did not see him again. He withdrew entirely from society, dismissing the staff and locking the gates of the house. Rumors spread quickly that he had gone mad, that he was experimenting with poisons, that he was already dead inside and merely walking about as a husk. I cannot say what became of him, for I never entered that house again. But sometimes when I pass it at night, I see a single light flickering in the upper window, and I hear faintly, though I know it must be imagination, the sound of someone whispering numbers in endless repetition. I think often of what he said. Once you glimpse the unknown quantity, you see the necessity of balance. Perhaps he did help his cousin on his way. Perhaps the inheritance was no accident, but the product of an equation only Marlowe understood. If so, then the balance did not stop with Edmund. It infected Marlowe himself, staining him, hollowing him, spreading through him like a toxin that no wealth could wash away. And maybe it doesn't stop there. For sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I see that number again, the one he circled in red, the one that twisted when I looked too long. I can't recall it fully, yet it lingers, haunting the edges of thought. And I wonder if by seeing it, the infection has touched me too.